with us to help us understand how we can improve our insulin sensitivity through raw foods. Very fascinating topic. How you doing, Dr. Dina?
I'm doing great. How are you doing tonight, Robbie?
I am doing very well. I'm going to launch a poll for everybody coming in, so you can let us know what type of diabetes you're living with, or maybe you're not living with diabetes. We want to know. So check that out in the poll. And also in the chat box, let us know where you're coming from. So I'm in Santa Monica, California. Where are you?
I'm in Santa Rosa, California. Actually, Dr. Rick and I are, and Dr. Rick will be coming with us shortly, so there'll be two of us tonight.
Absolutely. I think there's some fires where you guys are right now.
There's some fire concern, and what's really interesting is the area where we're located, there has been power outages, and we're kind of like in a little enclave area where we actually have power, but like all the neighborhoods around us don't. So we're very fortunate.
Exactly. It was meant to be because the universe knew that tonight you guys needed power for this important presentation.
That's right. And we've got a really exciting, really fun one coming up. So thank you all for joining us. We're so excited about this.
Yeah, this is definitely going to be fun. Let us know in the chat box where you guys are coming from. We're going to do Q&A tonight, just like we always do. And we will also be making some phone calls. So if you want to ask a question of Dr. Karen or Dr. Rick, this is your opportunity to talk to them directly. So you can put in your phone number at any time during the presentation tonight. And Jose is in the background. He will collect your number and we will give you a phone call. You could also directly send it to Jose if you wanted to. Whatever works for you, just give us your number, and we're going to make as many calls as we have time for tonight. But we got a great presentation, important information, and then we'll do some Q&A, and then we'll make some phone calls. Let's see here. We have somebody from Chicago. We have somebody from Alaska. That's fantastic.
Nice.
David from Sonoma County.
Hey, that's right next door.
Okay, I hope you're safe amidst the fires. One of our team members is in the Moreno Valley area of California, and there's like fires right outside her window. It's very scary.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy stuff. Washington, D.C., we got Debbie from Ohio. Fantastic. Beverly from New Brunswick, Canada. Paula from Costa Rica. All right. Sure. Hey, maybe you should come join us at our retreat. There's Dr. Rick. We got a retreat coming up in Costa Rica November 7th to the 11th. If anybody wants more information about that, just let us know. But we're excited. We got Shelly from Minnesota, Indiana in the house. This is great, guys. Let's see what the poll is reporting. Okay, here we go. This is unique. It's been a while since I've seen 11% living with type 1 diabetes. That's great. 13% now. Pre-diabetes is at 19%. Type 2 is at 31%. Then we have about 12% who do not have diabetes and 12% where a loved one has diabetes. Okay, we have no gestational diabetes and no type 1.5 tonight. But I like seeing this strong type 1 contingent in the audience tonight. It's excellent. Excellent stuff. Okay, so I think we can just go ahead and get started. I'll do a little brief introduction about mastering diabetes and let you guys take over. Does that sound good?
Sounds fantastic.
Okay, so for anybody who's new tonight, this is your first time coming to, here's what I want to see. In the chat box, if this is the first time you've attended a Mastering Diabetes webinar, type 1. Just type 1 in the chat box. I want to see if there's anybody here, this is their first Mastering Diabetes webinar. I think there are going to be a couple people. So I just want to give you just a brief, there we go. I got some ones in here. Paula, Kelly, Anne, Michelle, your first one. Okay. So Mastering Diabetes is founded by myself and my co-founder, Cyrus Kambata. We are both living with type 1 diabetes. We provide education via free webinars like this. We have YouTube videos. We have blog articles, Instagram. So we did some Snapchat when people were using Snapchat. We're everywhere. So we teach people how to adopt a low-fat, plant-based, whole food diet to maximize their insulin sensitivity. Hence why we brought in some experts tonight, Dr. Rick and Karen, to talk to us about how raw food can actually maximize your insulin sensitivity. And Cyrus and I both have a lot of experience eating a lot of raw foods and seeing incredible improvements in our own insulin sensitivity. And we see this in our clients. We have a coaching program. and we've worked with hundreds of type 1s and seen these results repeatedly. So we can vouch for what you're going to learn tonight. I personally have eaten nothing but raw foods for the past 12 years now. I have lots of fruits, lots of vegetables. I keep it really simple. And I am really just so fun to be working with you guys because I don't know how many years ago it was, but it was many, many years ago in my journey where I did a consultation with Dr. Rick, learning about my omega, fatty acids and all that. So your guys' work is amazing, and I'm really excited for everybody to learn from you guys tonight. So I will let you guys take it over.
All right, that sounds great. So I have a slide presentation. Throughout this presentation, we'll actually be bringing up some slides. So let me just...
So go to your entire screen.
Okay, so there we go.
No, your entire screen. And then choose that, and then click share.
There we go.
And then,
oh, look at that. How does that look for you, Robbie? Is it flashing on your end?
It is flashing.
All right, so that's we'll have to
turn that off.
Give us
No worries. Yeah, we'll get it set up here. Crystal says her dad had type 2 diabetes. Laura says hello from Virginia. And yes, we can see your chat box. Okay, your slide presentation looks good now, so I'll turn my camera off.
Okay, fantastic. So hello and welcome everyone to our webinar with Mastering Diabetes, Surprising Benefits of Eating Raw Food to Maximize Your Insulin Sensitivity. Dr. Rick and I and Robbie are super excited to share with you today our perspective on this fascinating topic. We want you to reach your health goals and are happy to provide you with information that can help you reach them while avoiding dietary and lifestyle pitfalls. This webinar is the fourth and last in our summer webinar series of Transcending What's Trending. So those of you who have come over from our list, you probably have seen several of our webinars this summer. We hope that's the case. And Dr. Rick and I have found in our collective 60 plus years of personal experience, as well as our research, education, and clinical experience, that it's really, really easy to be pulled in different directions depending on the prevailing trends in the health world, and that education is the greatest predictor of success on a raw food and plant-based diet. So for those of you who don't know us yet, I'm Dr. Karen Dina, and you'll be hearing from Dr. Rick Dina in a few minutes. We're both chiropractic physicians with a strong interest in plant-based and raw food nutrition, and we're board certified and licensed in the state of California. We've also hosted raw food summits for the past 4 years, where we interviewed successful, healthy, long-term raw vegans, including Cyrus and Robbie, to share with you how you can be successful on this path over the long term as well. We're also authors of the Raw Food Nutrition Handbook. And we're the developers of the Science of Raw Food Nutrition series of classes we taught for 10 years in person, and we're also the developers and instructors of the Mastering Raw Food Nutrition online and interactive course, which we'll share a little bit more about later on in this webinar. Now, before we continue, we'd like to let you know that the information and opinions expressed by us in this webinar are not intended to be used as medical advice and should not be used to diagnose or treat any medical condition or as a substitute for individual care. This webinar is presented with the understanding that we are not liable for misconception, misuse, or adverse effects resulting from its use. Any type of dietary change, nutritional therapy, or fasting should always be undertaken with the supervision of a qualified healthcare practitioner. Now, we may end up being those healthcare providers for you, but watching this webinar does not establish a doctor-patient relationship. So now we'd like to share with you a little bit of at least how I got started on this path in the first place. In our other webinars, Dr. Rick shares a little bit about how he got started, but tonight, since we have so much great information to share with you, we're just going to give you one story here. Now, I found raw food at a time when I was experiencing notable fatigue, for which there was allegedly no answer. Now, I was in college at the time and I was sleeping 10 to 12 and sometimes even more hours per night, and still waking up feeling like I needed more sleep to feel good. Now, I saw 3 medical professionals And after multiple tests and evaluations, I finally had a diagnosis, fatigue of unknown origin. So they had a whole list of everything that I didn't have, but couldn't pinpoint the source of my fatigue. And I asked every single one of them if my fatigue had anything to do with my college diet and lifestyle. And they all emphatically said no. Now, an interesting thing to mention here is that this all happened 30 years ago. So not a lot was known about chronic fatigue and other types of related things that we know now. So, given that my situation was what it was, I might have a different diagnosis now. But nonetheless, I was kind of left to my own devices. So I started reading and researching different healing systems, and this led me to a whole food and plant-based dietary approach, which really started to help improve my fatigue. But really, when I learned about and I implemented a raw food diet, my energy just soared, like far beyond the impressive improvements that I experienced by just eating a whole food cooked plant-based diet. Really, a long story short is that my fatigue vanished along with a variety of other symptoms that I'd had for years. And I had more energy than I knew what to do with. I couldn't remember a time when I actually felt better. I started to look healthier. I slept better. I actually enjoyed exercising, and my digestion improved just dramatically. I was so inspired by the health results that I was experiencing that I felt compelled to learn more about the inner workings of the human body and nutrition and the diet-health connection. I really wanted to immerse myself in learning as much as I could, so I read lots of raw food books. I attended conferences, lectures, and gatherings, talked to a lot of people. I even listened to a local raw food radio program in my area. And this was all great, but I really wanted to learn about raw food and science and research in so much more detail. So I was just totally on a mission. I really wanted to learn as much as I could and to continue to get better. So what I did was I went back to school to earn a second undergraduate degree in biology, and I received doctorate level education in naturopathic medicine and chiropractic, which really helped me put everything that I observed into perspective and on a much deeper level. Now, during this time, my fatigue recovery was totally put to the test. Now, fortunately, I received an academic scholarship for my biology degree, but I was on my own for all my other expenses, so I had to work half-time to full-time, along with studying for my academically rigorous classes. So I had to keep my GPA up to maintain my scholarship, and so on many days I'd go to school, and then I'd go to work, and then I'd study for a few hours, and then I'd go to bed. And then during my naturopathic and chiropractic education, I had a similar schedule. And I totally attribute my ability to be able to keep this type of schedule and do really well in school to my raw food diet. It made such a difference for me. Now, when I think back to my pre-raw days, there's just no way that I would have been able to keep up this type of schedule. I mean, it's just amazing, the difference that this raw food had made for me. And I was so inspired by my results with raw food that I stayed on this formal educational path for over a decade, knowing that when I got out, I'd have the education and the experience to really make a difference in people's health with this solid educational foundation. And I've learned a lot through my research, my education, my clinical and personal and teaching experience. So over the years, I've refined and revised my approach to raw food, and I've tailored it to my individual needs. And with the educational opportunities Dr. Rick and I have developed and teach, we can show you how to do this too. And now, speaking of Dr. Rick, next we're going to go into his educational portion of the program.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for putting up with our little bit of a delay here. This is our first time doing a webinar with Mastering Diabetes, and so we're figuring things out a little bit as we go along, but content is king. We've got that all set here. I'm just going to, for a second,
You sure do, Dr. Rick. It's the best information in the business. We're excited.
Okay, is my mic on?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. And I just wanted to, let's see, I'm not sure what I'm doing here. Oh, I know what I want to do. I turn that off. So I want to keep that on. Give me just a moment here.
We have Clarita from Brazil. Thanks for tuning in from Brazil. That's fantastic.
I think I know her. I
And
think we've met before.
That's wonderful. And there's great questions coming in, so we're going to get to those during the Q&A. So anything that comes up during the presentation, feel free to put it in the chat box, and also put in your phone number if you want us to call you.
Yep, we'll be ready to go. So I just wanted to say hi down here in the bottom right corner. I don't know if I'm visible, but I'm going to turn that off now so I'm not in the way of anything on the slides. And so this, we've done 3 previous webinars actually over the summer in what we call our Transcending What's Trending series. We did one on our perspective on ketogenic diets. We did one on intermittent fasting, and we did a previous one on where you get nutrients on plant-based and raw food diets. Those are kind of perpetually trending. Also perpetually trending is people are concerned about carbohydrates and blood glucose levels because they've heard a lot of different myths out there. So we're going to cover some of those things in this presentation here. So lots of trends come and go. For example, all the functional medicine doctors these days are into a ketogenic diet. I mean, what were they doing 5 and 10 years ago? Ketogenic just came out, right? So they were following other myths and other different things. And really, if you have a solid foundation, you can truly be trend proof, or at least very trend resistant. And that's what we want for all of you. So that's why we've teamed up, for example, here with Robbie and Cyrus from Mastering Diabetes to help shed a little bit of light on things. A lot of times people are like, oh, I can figure stuff out, or just go watch YouTube. And there's some good information out there, but there is some very questionable information also. So when you have a really solid educational foundation, you truly can be as healthy as possible. So having said that, let's get on to our topic. And there are, you'll see a few different slide themes here because we've pieced together a few different things. And some of this is right out of our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition curriculum. So we're going to start out with a very appropriate topic for working with mastering diabetes. We are going to look at some different risk factors, in particular insulin resistance versus a couple of different diets here. And one diet was what they call a low protein, low calorie diet. And this was described here as an uncooked and unprocessed plant-based diet. The subjects, quote, ate a wide variety of raw vegetables, fruit, nuts, seeds, sprouted grains and cereals, and olive oil, and strictly avoided processed and refined foods and foods of animal origin. Now, in our opinions, collectively, your 4 hosts here, we're not fans of olive oil, and so we wouldn't consider that the absolute healthiest way to eat a raw food diet, but no refined foods and no foods of animal origin. So we believe that these people were fairly categorized as raw foodists. As Dr. Karen will share with you coming up in a little bit, that isn't always the case in the peer-reviewed literature. In any case, the average time on the diet was about 4.5 years, with a range from 2 to 10 years. The subjects were sedentary. Now, that's not the healthiest, but they were sedentary because the control group was also sedentary. And in this case, they were just looking at the dietary differences between the 2 groups, and they wanted to make everything else as similar as possible. So they were the control group was matched to the raw group for age, sex, and height. And the control group was eating basically a standard American diet, also known as a typical Western diet. So let's take a look here at the macronutrient profile of raw diet on the left and the standard American control diet on the right. Carbohydrates, fat, and protein. Both groups got about 48 or 49% of their calories from carbohydrates. The raw foodists got 43% of their calories from fat. We think a lot of that probably is coming from the olive oil that they're consuming. But the The control group got 34% of the calories from fat. And you can see less protein in the raw food group too, because again, with the olive oil has no protein. So for those of us who don't consume oil or other processed foods like refined sweeteners that have no protein in them, our protein content's actually a little bit higher. So notably more fat, and actually this is a 26% increase in fat from the control group to the raw diet group. I had said in our captions a third more, and I was thinking of the other group in this study that we're going to look at the end. So, but nevertheless, considerably more fat. Now, I'd like to make something very, very clear here before we continue. Here's a slide from our blood sugar regulation section in our curriculum. It's been one of my favorite topics for over 20 years now. This is slide number 47 out of about 100 in the presentation. And we have a lot of information leading up to this that supports what it says, and a lot of information after that that continues to support what it says. You may have already read it, but I'll read it here. Fat, both dietary and body fat, interferes with insulin, bringing glucose out of the blood and into the cells. This is known as insulin resistance, which is the hallmark of type 2 diabetes as well as gestational diabetes, and it makes type 1 diabetes a lot more complicated and challenging and difficult to regulate. So I will say pretty definitively, all else being equal, the more fat you have in your diet, the more insulin resistant you will be. And similarly, all else being equal, the more body fat you have, the more insulin resistant you will be. But what if all else isn't equal? What if you look at a higher fat raw diet versus a lower fat, not low on an absolute scale, but lower fat, a standard American diet? We actually see some differences. So here again, we have raw diet on the left, and we have the control group on the right. And we can see in terms of fasting insulin, we've got about half the level in the raw diet group compared to the control group. And typically speaking, in between meals, when you have lower insulin levels, that is an indicator that your body is sensitive to insulin. Your body doesn't have to make as much to get the job done. Whereas if you have higher insulin levels, your body produces extra insulin to compensate for insulin resistance. And if you're dealing with type 1 diabetes, that means you have to inject more insulin in order to keep your blood glucose levels stable. So the other side of that coin is they actually studied the insulin sensitivity index, and the higher fat raw foodists had double the insulin sensitivity just about compared to the control group. So what then are the differences between the two groups if we get into this in more detail? So first of all, total fat matters, but the composition of the fat that we consume also matters in a majorly different way. So what we can see here is SFA is saturated fats, monounsaturated fats. The raw foodists got a lot of that from their olive oil. And then polyunsaturated fats. That's where the omega-6s and the omega-3s are. And we can see here, despite more total fat and a higher percentage of calories from fat in the raw group, the overall level of saturated fat is lower, and the level of mono and polyunsaturated fats is higher. That is one of the major differences that can help explain why the higher fat raw group is actually more sensitive to insulin. Trans fat. Now, this study was done before they banned hydrogenation and trans fats in foods, but you can see a lot less trans fats in the raw diet, another major component. Let's take a look at some other differences here. Fiber intake, over double the fiber intake in the raw food group compared to the control group. And one of the benefits of fiber, so a lot of us have heard that fiber helps regulate blood glucose because high fiber foods, your body has to work through the fiber in order to access the carbohydrates, and that takes longer compared to if there's no fiber in there and the carbohydrates are more readily available for the body to access. But there's another really cool aspect of this as well. And to make a complicated but cool story very short, there's different categories of fiber, and a major category of fiber is known as prebiotic fiber. Prebiotic fiber feeds probiotic bacteria, and this healthy bacteria in our gut, in addition to other benefits, produces short chain fatty acids. There's one 3-carbon short chain fatty acid known as propionate, which helps our body regulate glucose levels. So all else being equal, the more fiber you consume, the more of that blood glucose regulating effect you benefit from. And if you ate a healthier raw food diet with more fruits and vegetables and not non-fiber products like olive oil, a lot of us are consuming fiber intakes at like double that level, closer to, in the upper 2 digits or into the low hundreds in terms of grams of fiber per day. So that could explain part of our conundrum, if you will, part of our paradox as well. Now, total calorie intake was just under 2,000 for the raw foodists, about 2,350 for the control group. And I calculated out that the almost 2,000 calories times 43% comes out to about 95 grams of fat per day for the raw foodists, 89 when you do the math for the control group. So there's still more total fat in the raw food group, but with fewer calories, their body mass index is different. So we can see 21.3 for body mass index versus 26.5. I put here, and the body mass index is your weight in kilograms over your height in meters squared. So 18.5 or lower is considered underweight. That's why I've got this line here. 25 or higher is considered overweight, and 30 or above is considered obese. So the control group, those people had more body fat. And to make a long story short, more body fat means more free circulating free fatty acids, which get into our cells, which go through a number of chemical changes, which interfere with the insulin receptor telling the glucose channel to open up. So that could be another factor as well. And not surprising, given the lower body mass index, the raw foodist had a lower percentage of body fat. Now, there were a few other measurements that might not be directly related to insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance, but many of you know, and I'll explain some of the reasons in the next section, that people dealing with diabetes, having higher than average blood sugar levels, are at increased risk for vascular disease, such as cardiovascular disease leading to heart attacks, cerebrovascular disease leading to strokes, and other complications. So there's other factors that also contribute to vascular disease. And so we're going to look at some of those because they are relevant for people dealing with diabetes. So the sodium intake of the raw food group was considerably lower, about 1,400 milligrams per day. Dr. Karen and I like to keep our level below 1,000 milligrams per day. So they're a little higher, but still quite a bit lower than the control group. You can see here that the raw foodists consumed quite a bit more potassium per day from the fruits and vegetables. And if you look at the ratio of sodium to potassium, you see a lot more potassium than sodium in the raw foodists. You see about equal amounts in the control group. And even though that isn't the only consideration in our blood pressure, there probably is some cause and effect that shows that the raw foodists also have lower blood pressure. So 28 points lower for the top or the systolic number, and 17 points lower for the diastolic or the bottom number. So another risk factor, and that is really good to see. How about their lipid profiles here? Well, we see the total cholesterol is considerably lower in the raw food group. The HDL, the good cholesterol, is actually a little bit higher. And the LDL, also known as the bad cholesterol that we're going to see a bit about in the next section, is considerably higher in the control group, even though there's less total fat in the control group. But again, we have an emerging, much different overall profile to look at, and we can't just focus on one particular measurement. The total to HDL ratio is a very important measurement of this, and the lower the better. So when we take 143, the total cholesterol for the raw foodist, divided by 56, we get 2.6. And when we take the 187 for the control group divided by 52, we get about 3.6, and lower is better for this number. And when you're 3 or less, that is considered ideal. So the raw foodists are in ideal shape here. Triglycerides are the other major component of a lipid panel, and we can see a little bit less than half of the triglyceride levels. This is blood fat. And I know I mentioned free fatty acids before traveling through the blood that can get into the cells. That's a small percentage of the way fat gets circulated through the body. The majority of the fat, there's 3 fatty acids attached to a glycerol molecule, hence the term triglycerides or blood fat. So that's also quite a bit lower. Getting even a little bit fancier here, some of you have heard of a measurement specifically designed to look at inflammation in our blood vessel walls, known as high sensitivity, also known as cardiac CRP, which stands for C-reactive protein. All else being equal, the more inflammation there are in your blood vessel walls, the greater risk you're at for developing vascular disease. So we see much, much lower inflammation in the raw foodists compared to the control group. Generally speaking, when there is inflammation in your artery walls, that they get swollen and it makes them thicker. And there is a test called the carotid artery thickness test. And you can see that thinner is better, and that is lower in the raw foodist compared to the control group. And for those of you who are really kind of nerdy, this is a very complex looking model here. And I'm just going to explain it very briefly, and we're going to look at it again in the next section. So vessel lumen. So this is a blood vessel. So the lumen is the hollow center part of the blood vessel, and the vessel wall is the physical part that creates basically the tube. And what we're going to focus on here is just over here on the right. We can see that these guys called cytokines are causing swelling in the blood vessel wall. So number one, there's inflammation is creating this swelling, and that's measured in this high sensitivity C-reactive protein. And because the inflammation is causing swelling, it makes the artery walls thicker, and that's where you get a higher score here. So in any case, that shows, it just explains the last 2 slides essentially. Okay, so a couple of other things here to take a look at. So number one, we said that the raw foodists ate more fat, but I am suggesting this different fatty acid profile, a different percentage of saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated fats compared to the control group is one of the major factors that helps them to be more insulin sensitive. And there's some other factors we looked at as well. So now the plot's going to thicken just a little bit, and we are going to look at the third group that was in this study, where they had runners, very long distance runners, ran like 40 to 50 miles a week on average, who have been at that for a long time, who ate a standard American diet. So we can see their fasting insulin levels are lower, and their insulin sensitivity is actually greater. Now, by the way, in measuring 20 or so different important health parameters in these 3 groups, the general pattern is that the control group was the worst, the runner group was intermediate, and the raw food diet people were the best. This, for insulin sensitivity, is the one exception where the runners were actually the best. Now, here's the good news about this. if we were to go back to this fatty acid profile and improve it a bit, get rid of the olive oil, maybe increase some of the omega-3 fats. Omega-3 fats, that's actually the exception where most people don't get enough omega-3s. And in that case, when you increase your omega-3s, you actually increase insulin sensitivity. And so if we improved this fatty acid profile even more, and what if we cut the total amount of fat about in half, which is what Dr. Karen and I tend to recommend, and the Mastering Diabetes program, cuts that down even a little bit more. So I'm going to suggest that if we were to, number one, improve the fatty acid profile a little bit more and cut the total fat down, we could improve the insulin sensitivity of these raw foodists. And I'm going to show you Dr. Karen and I's levels at the end before we talk about our curriculum. And here's the really good news. The way that your fatty acid profile and your dietary profile affect your blood glucose levels works by separate mechanisms than how running increases insulin sensitivity. So in other words, what that means is it means like, oh, if you run, then this doesn't matter, or if your diet's good, exercise doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that. Because they work by separate mechanisms, the effects are additive. So what would happen again if you start with these raw foodists, you improve their fatty acid profile, you cut back on their total amount of fat, and then you add that to you add some physical activity to that, you are then, I would suggest, off the charts in this insulin sensitivity index. I will show you Dr. Karen and I's insulin and A1C scores at the end. And as Robbie and Cyrus know so well, at Mastering Diabetes at their retreats, they do just that. And they show people with type 1 diabetes dramatically reducing the amount of insulin they have to take. And they show people with type 2 diabetes when they start there and then continue to follow the plan afterwards. In follow-up blood measurements, they have lower A1Cs and lower fasting insulin. And all of this stuff can really work together synergistically. And especially when you get some sleep and you enjoy your life and, all that kind of stuff.
That's right. Dr. Rick, we see these changes in days at the retreats.
Absolutely.
It's incredible.
And so again, what do? Going back to this, you take this, let's say compared to this study, you take this raw diet, you improve it, and you add the physical activity. No wonder you see results so quickly. And that's awesome.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so anyway, it so happens that in going through the order here, I got two sections in a row. So I'm gonna continue on here. And so that was the section on insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity. And now we'll go into how cooking can actually relate to some of the complications of diabetes. All right, so if everyone's still with me, we will jump right in here to this section. So we're going to look at something called dietary AGEs. And AGE stands for Advanced Glycation End Products. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to look at some cholesterol. Now, this is LDL cholesterol. It's made in the liver, and it's going out to our cells so our cells can do important things with it. But the thing is, cholesterol is a fatty, waxy substance. And if you've ever tried to mix wax and water, it just floats. It doesn't mix in with water. If you've ever poured oil in water, the oil comes to the top. Oil and water don't mix. Wax and water, fat and water don't mix. So there is a lipoprotein carrier around this cholesterol. It's a low density lipoprotein in this case that allows it to travel through the bloodstream. So it's traveling through the bloodstream with glucose, with insulin, with vitamins and minerals and hormones and all sorts of other things. And glucose, based on its nature, the way it likes to react, actually sticks itself to this protein. So that's a glucose in the center there. It's stuck itself to that protein. And then glucose actually reaches up to the other part and pulls it down, and it now changes the shape of this LDL strand. All right, what's the big deal about that? Well, in 1985, Nobel Prize recipients Goldstein and Brown discovered something called the LDL receptor on the surface of cells. And here's a video, a still of a video where this rectangular thing is a cell here. And they're showing here these LDL receptors. So LDL cholesterol goes into the receptor, the cell brings it in, and then it makes hormones and makes it part of the cell membranes and, the other things, the other important functions of cholesterol. Now, the LDL receptor is designed for LDL cholesterol. And if some HDL goes in here, it doesn't bring it in. It says, no, we're designed for LDL. If some insulin goes in here, if some serotonin goes in here, if anything else goes in here, if some omega-3s go in here, it says, no, we're not letting you in. We're designed for LDL cholesterol only. So it's sort of like a lock and a key effect. The keyhole is the LDL receptor, the key here, the keyhole or the lock is the receptor, and LDL is the key. Now, what if I took a blowtorch and got this part of the key heated up, and I grabbed it with a pair of pliers and I bent this piece over and I changed the shape of the key? What do you think would happen then when we put it in the lock? Would it open this door? Probably not. So similarly, the LDL receptor is designed for normal looking LDL. But when glucose alters the shape of the LDL, and they call those processes where glucose sticks to protein glycation processes. So glycated LDL will not be recognized by the LDL receptor. Let's go back. It won't get in here, and it will stay in the bloodstream. And then you have higher levels of bad cholesterol in your bloodstream. This is, and the higher your average blood glucose levels are, the more these reactions occur. This is one mechanism that explains why people dealing with diabetes are at higher risk for vascular disease. So more LDL cholesterol stays in your bloodstream along with those high glucose levels. And now we've got the cholesterol sticking by glucose. Glucose is gluing the cholesterol to the collagen strands that make up the lining of your artery walls. And then glucose also glues different types of cholesterol together, and it lumps them all together. It glues them to the walls of the arteries. That is a problem. So let's look at, for those of you who are kind of nerdy, let's look at a few more details here. So we have glucose. Glucose is reactive. When it's traveling through the blood, it can actually open up and turn into a string-like form. And it creates this group here called an aldehyde group, which sticks to collagen. So that's how glucose actually sticks itself to proteins. And then back to this complicated looking diagram here, we have the glucose here opening up. It's sticking itself to collagen that makes up our blood vessel walls. And now it's creating this thing called a cross bridge or a cross link that sticks these collagen proteins together and makes the blood vessel walls stiffer now. When your blood vessel walls are stiffer, that increases your blood pressure. And guess what? That's yet another risk factor for vascular disease and another mechanism by which people dealing with diabetes with higher than average glucose levels are at greater risk for vascular disease. So this process, again, is known as glycation. And look at this in Budapest in 2016. They even had a World Congress on glycation. It was part of something called the glycation and the Maillard reaction. If you're French speaking, you can say that much more eloquently than I can. And this has to do with the effects of heating on food, which we're going to talk about next. And there was even a whole Maillard symposium in Tokyo. It looks like they have that every year. This is their banner from 2015. Okay, so we understand how glycation reactions from high glucose levels can stick proteins together and cause various complications in our bodies. As it turns out, there are substances known as dietary AGEs as well. And what we have here, looking at the literature on this, it says, in addition to AGEs created internally from circulating glucose, that's what we just saw a couple of examples of, it says many arrive ready-made in the foods we ingest. So they're saying there's actually external sources of these AGEs. They say, indeed, diet may be the single greatest source of AGEs, with lesser amounts arising internally, and from another significant external source, cigarette smoking. So let's look at that a little bit further. Now, this chart looks a little bit complicated, but give me just a moment to explain. We have 6 headings over here. See ABC on the left and ABC on the right. And for each of those 6 headings, we have 3 bars here, what BL, HAG, HAGE, and LAGE. So BL is they did all this measurements at baseline, and then they fed one group a high AGE diet where many of these pre-formed AGEs were in the food, and then they fed the other group a low AGE diet where there were fewer AGEs that formed in the food. And then they did a washout period, and then they switched the groups and reported all of the results here. Now, over here on the right, C-reactive protein. That's that measurement of inflammation in our blood vessels. And these guys stand for tumor necrosis factor alpha and vascular adhesion molecule. These are indicators of unhealthy inflammatory processes going on in the body. SAGEs, those are AGEs floating in your blood. And there's 2 types here. This one's called methylglyoxal, and this is the LDL cholesterol that's been altered, that's turned into AGEs like we saw the pictures of. And for each of these things, it's higher on the high AGE diet, it's lower on the low AGE diet. Now, here's where things get very interesting. The high AGE diet and the low AGE diet were composed of the same food. And you might be thinking, wait a minute, how could you have different diets but the same food? Well, think of this. Raw broccoli versus steamed broccoli. Is that the same? If somebody ate just raw broccoli and someone else just ate steamed broccoli, those would actually be different diets. So the literature actually says for this study, 2 study diets were designed to have similar content of calories, protein, carbohydrate, and fat, but differ by about 5-fold in AGE content by varying and what they did is they varied the cooking time and temperature. Longer cooking times, higher temperatures actually create AGEs in the food. So a couple of more slides to finish this section up. It says during the 20th century, or since the turn of the 20th century, food chemists have appreciated that the changes responsible for increasing the AGE content of a food depend directly on temperature and are greatly heightened by long exposure to high heat. Now, these aren't the foods I would have picked, but here's what they did in this study. They said cooking increased the donuts' AGE content 24-fold. And the duck skin 101-fold. Then when they compared the donut to the duck skin, they said roasted duck skin exhibited 15 times the AGE content of a donut. And that brings up the general principle where they find that several patterns emerged. Foods from animal sources that were high in protein and lipid content had the highest values of these 2 particular dietary AGE compounds that formed from cooking, and the highest pro-oxidant cell activating potency. So if we look here, broiled chicken cubes, broiled tuna, and boiled egg yolks, the types of things that diabetes doctors tell people with diabetes to eat. So when Robbie and Cyrus both originally got their diagnosis, they share their stories that these are the types of foods they were told to eat because they're low on the glycemic index and they don't contain carbohydrates.
Exactly.
Now, what's that?
That's exactly right. That's
That's what they tell you. Now, what they don't tell you, because they're not as nerdy as Dr. Karen and I, and they don't know this, is that those foods that they recommend are full of dietary AGEs. We look at these levels here. Look at how much higher. This stands for carboxymethyl lysine. That's one of those preformed dietary AGEs that when those come into your body, it causes all the same complications that high glucose levels do in your bloodstream, like we saw before. We see much lower levels. And now these aren't healthy plant foods, but they're much lower. And if we go, and there wasn't as much of a difference for this stuff, methylglyoxal, and intermolecular cross-link formation. Let's just go back here. When glucose sticks stuff together, that's called a cross-link. In food, when you heat, okay, and the glucose is sticking protein together. In food, the heat is sticking protein together. So if you think of an egg white that's raw, it's actually not white, it's clear and runny. And then you cook it and it gets white and solid. And when that comes into our body, let's look at here, intermolecular cross-link formation. We see 110, 9.2, and 22.8 for the high protein animal foods, and we see much lower levels for the plant foods. So they tell you to eat, chicken, tuna, and egg yolks. And number one, too much fat. Number two, not a good profile of fat, too much saturated fat, which contributes to insulin resistance. Number three, these foods have no fiber in them. Number four, they're calorie dense, so then you put more body fat on. And number five in this list, there could be a much longer list, they contain preformed products that cause all the same set of complications that high blood glucose levels do. And that's what they're trying to avoid. So they're fighting the fire while they're feeding the flames because they don't even know this research exists. No wonder people don't get better from diabetes when they follow the conventional advice. Robbie, just like you and Cyrus didn't do well until you found out about plant-based and raw food diets. Then you guys started to get much more stable, have a much easier life, and be able to use a lot less insulin. And that is the good news here.
Yes.
All right. So Dr. Karen's got a quick section here on cooking food. We're actually going to look specifically at beta carotene as well, because that's one of those big things that comes up about cooking. And then, then we'll tell you a little bit about our curriculum, and then we'll open up for questions. So seeing we've got the same station here, give us just a minute to transition Dr. Karen back into the driver's seat here, and she will continue on.
All right.
All right. So Dr. Rick just talked about a lot of really interesting things there. So speaking of cooking, it would be interesting to consider this. Is it a good idea to, well, actually, hold on a sec. Speaking of cooking, it's a good idea to consider this question. Is all cooked food created equal, or are all cooking methods created equal in their effects on food? So how does this type of food compare to this? I know what you guys are thinking. All too often, cooked food is lumped into one category when there's a huge difference between cooking methods. Cooking methods can differ in the amount of heat that's used, the cooking medium, such as water, oil, or air, for example, the nutrients preserved or the nutrients destroyed, whether or not new substances are formed. Dr. Rick just talked about the formation of AGEs, and there are a lot more of those two that we actually cover in our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition curriculum that we'll be sharing a little bit with you shortly. So cooking methods can range in temperature from low to high. So for example, if we're looking at steaming and boiling, those are going to be some of the lowest temperature so-called cooking methods. Steaming and boiling, they're kind of at about 212 Fahrenheit, 100 Celsius. And at the top, we've got broiling, which is over 500 degrees Fahrenheit, which in centigrade or Celsius is over over 300 degrees. So pretty high there, a big difference. So let's take a look a little bit at nutrient loss here. So essentially, the higher the heat and the longer that you cook something, the greater the nutrient loss. So let's take a look at steaming and boiling, because those are the lowest temperature of all the cooking methods. So here's an example of what steaming looks like. You're probably familiar with what a steamer looks like. So what happens is you've got boiling water in the bottom of this unit here that creates steam, and then that steam rises to cook the food on the shelves above. Now, the food is not in direct contact with the boiling water. It's not immersed in it as it is with boiling. And here's a picture of what boiling looks like. And I know that y'all know what this looks like, but it's good to just take a look so we can think about this as we're talking. So let's take a look at some research and the difference between boiling versus steaming of broccoli florets. Now, vitamin C is one of the vitamins that tends to be the most susceptible to loss with heating. It's a water-soluble vitamin, and the water-soluble vitamins tend to be more susceptible to loss with heating, whereas the fat-soluble ones are not as susceptible, because fat has a tendency to have an insulating effect on vitamins. So in this particular study, we see a comparison of vitamin C loss with boiling and steaming of broccoli florets. And what was found was that 33% of the vitamin C in the florets was lost after just 5 minutes of boiling. However, the researchers found that there was no significant loss of vitamin C after steaming for 5 minutes. So this study is a reasonable representation of similar studies that you find in the scientific literature. It's not an outlier. So in other words, boiling can cause a much more significant loss of vitamin C, whereas with steaming, we don't really see much of a loss at all. Now, the next one I want to look here at is folate. Now, folate is also known as vitamin B9, and like vitamin C, it's a water-soluble vitamin that tends to be susceptible to damage by heat. Now, in this study, we have a comparison between boiling and steaming of broccoli florets, so similar to the other study, and what was found was that with boiling, 51% of folate was lost after 5 minutes, and then 58% was lost after 10 minutes. Now, with steaming, there was no significant loss after 10 minutes. So that's quite a bit of a difference there. Kind of the bottom line here is that steaming is the best for vitamin preservation. And one thing I'd like to mention is that there's a lot of other studies that show similar trends. These are just, I would say these studies are pretty representative of what you see in the scientific literature. Higher heat cooking methods lead to greater nutrient loss and new substance formation, for example, like heterocyclic amines, acrylamide, and Dr. Rick talked about dietary AGEs briefly. There are several others that we also cover in our curriculum. Now, so far, we've seen a couple of examples of how nutrients can be lost in significant amounts, even with low temperature cooking methods such as boiling. Now, with higher temperature cooking methods, there's much greater nutrient loss. Now, there are other factors to consider in addition to cooking methods, temperatures, and times, such as if the nutrients are water soluble, fat soluble, minerals, phytonutrients, lots of other things too. The bottom line is that there is a significant body of research demonstrating that many nutrients are lost in appreciable quantities by cooking. Now, on the other side of the coin, there are a small number of nutrients where it's been proposed that cooking is required for the body to absorb them. And I think you probably might be thinking of what they could be right now. The two that come up the most often, at least from our experience, are beta-carotene and lycopene. So that being said, let's take a look at beta-carotene. Now, beta carotene for a long time has been a point of conversation in the decision to eat more raw or cooked foods. And invariably, the conversation on raw versus cooked does come up, and somebody will almost always say, but don't you need to cook for beta carotene? I saw a video that said so. Now, an important point to be aware of is that it's best not to make such a decision on just one study. I know a lot of you know this, but it's good to just talk about it here. When someone makes the whole picture out of one particular study, they invariably are missing out. They're making, when you make the entire picture out of one particular study, that's called cherry picking. And maybe you've heard this term before. Essentially, if one is looking to find research to support their point of view, they're probably going to be able to find it. And that's called confirmation bias. And it's something that we teach you about in our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition course. We talk about how to avoid it. And we'll explain a little bit more in just a few minutes. We also teach you how to evaluate research that you come across to determine how accurate it is, and to understand what the study is actually telling you, and how to make sense of conflicting information, or if it is actually a good study. Now, here's a good example of a cooking for beta carotene study that was published years ago. And a lot of people have asked us about this study over the years, which is one of the reasons why we decided to cover it in this webinar. Now, I've seen this study referred to many, many times when somebody is advocating for cooking for beta carotene absorption. And this study is referred to as the Geeson study. Like I said, it's an older study. It was published in 2010. There are many health parameters that were actually discussed and studied in the Geeson study. One of them being beta carotene status of people who eat a standard Western diet, a whole food, mostly plant-based diet, and a group of raw food enthusiasts. People often cite this study to make the case that one needs to cook vegetables in order to absorb beta carotene. Now, we've discussed this in a few of our previous webinars. So for those of you who have actually come on our webinars, we've referred to this as the cooking for beta carotene hypothesis. We often say this kind of like tongue in cheek, but it's something to think about. And here's why we call it this. Because if we take a look at what we have up here on the screen, you can see that there are three groups of women that were part of this study. We've got the standard Western diet group. We've got the wholesome nutrition group, which was largely plant-based with some cooked foods. And then we've got the raw food diet group all the way over here on the right. Now, not surprisingly, the standard Western diet group has the lowest intake of beta carotene here at 5.5 plus or minus 0.2 milligrams per day. And then the wholesome nutrition group was at 9.3, and then the raw food diet group was at 14.7. Okay, so seeing the raw food as the highest, that's not a surprise at all. Glance, when you take a look at the raw foodists here at 17.4, you think, wow, that's a significant amount of beta carotene, especially in comparison to the other two groups. One of them being at 9.3, that's the wholesome nutrition group, and then the 5.5 with the standard Western diet group. Now, it's interesting. When I was looking at this 14.7 number here, I thought, all right, that looks like a lot in comparison to the other ones. But then I thought, wait a minute. I know that I eat much more beta carotene than 14.7 milligrams per day. And that just sort of got the whole ball rolling along this way of thinking. I looked at one of my nutrient analyses of what I ate in a day at the time, and I found that actually I'm more in the realm of about 55 up to about 60 milligrams per day. And this one nutrient analysis that I looked at was 57.4. So that's quite a bit more than what we see here for the raw foodists. Now, Dr. Rick, on one particular day, he had 48 milligrams of beta carotene. Now, in general, what I see in the raw food community, people that I know who have been on this path for quite some time, the amount of beta carotene that they eat tends to range from about 30 to about over 80 milligrams per day. It seems like people who eat more of a low fruit diet, they tend to be around 30 or thereabouts, a little bit more. And then the people who eat a lot of fruit, they're kind of like in the 80 milligram per day category. Dr. Rick Dr. Rick and I are kind of like right in between. Now, that's just something interesting to think about here, because when we compare that to the 14.7, you got to wonder where that number actually came from. So one thing I did was I actually looked at the calorie consumption of the Giessen study raw foodists, and I wanted to see if that could have been a factor in the 14.7 milligram per day number. And what I found was that they were at about 1,800 calories per day. The term kcal means calorie, just so you know. And as far as Dr. Rick and I go, we're in the 2,000 calorie per day category. So calories might have accounted for some of the difference in the beta carotene between Dr. Rick and I and the raw foodists in this study. So what I wanted to do was take a closer look at what these raw foodists in the study were actually eating. So what I found was so interesting. If you see what I have circled right here, you can see that some of the raw foodists here were eating bread and pastries and milk and dairy products and eggs and meat products and fish products. I was amazed. I actually took a closer look at the study. I read the whole thing several times. What I found was that 24% of the raw foodists that were in this study were actually fully plant-based. And so what that means is that over 75% of them were eating an omnivorous diet. And most of the raw foodists that I've known for many years have been in the fully plant-based or vegan persuasion or way of eating realm, I would say. It would have been interesting to see what the beta carotene consumption of these raw foodists would have looked like if they were fully plant-based, because some of their calories were going in the direction of animal foods and being taken away from beta carotene rich types of foods like fruits, for example. Now, the number of people in this study was small too. As you can see here up on the screen, we've got 104 people that were evaluated here. So it's not a huge study sample. I would have liked to have seen more people included in this just to get a little bit more information. Now, for these reasons, I don't think it's appropriate to extrapolate information about raw food diets in general just from this study, because there's some confounding factors that we see here. Nonetheless, we see that in these raw foodists, blood beta carotene levels were lower than in the wholesome nutrition group. Okay, so what we see here when it comes to blood beta carotene levels is that the raw food diet group had an average of about 1.16 micromoles per liter, and the wholesome nutrition group was at 1.65. The standard Western diet was at 1.07. So as you can see, there was clearly a difference between the three groups, with the wholesome nutrition group being the highest. Now, some things to consider here. Given that generally beta carotene is better absorbed with cooking, and in some other situations too, such as the presence of fat, and there's a lot of other things too. It's not just cooking. One could come to the conclusion that a raw food diet might hinder one's ability to absorb beta carotene, and that we should cook our vegetables to get more beta carotene like in the wholesome nutrition group. Now, that's a really easy conclusion, right? Now, it's really easy to take the word of researchers, but once again, taking a closer look at the beta carotene for practicing raw foodists will give us a clearer picture. Now, if you're curious as to your blood beta carotene level, you can get a test. Both Dr. Rick and I have had our blood beta carotene levels tested. Now, remember, I usually eat in the range of about 55 to 60 milligrams of beta carotene per day, sometimes down around 50. Dr. Rick, he's about 45 to 48, 50 milligrams of beta carotene per day. He doesn't like carrots as much as I do. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Last time we had our blood beta carotene levels tested, they were, let's take a look, and we'll take a look at Dr. Rick first. Here we go. Here's Dr. Rick's blood work. Where's his beta carotene level? It was 90. All right, 90 micrograms per deciliter. And if we compare that to the reference range, which is 3 to 91, he was in the very upper portion of the reference range. Amazing. Okay, so 90 micrograms per deciliter. Now, let's compare that to the people in the study. In order to do that, we have to do a little conversion. So 90 milligrams per deciliter will translate into 1.7 micromoles per liter. So let's go over here and take a look at what we see with our groups. And as you can see, 1.7 micromoles per liter is higher than every single one of the groups. So excellent. Now, what about me? Let's take a look. Now for me, I was eating more beta carotene than Dr. Rick. Let's see what that looks like in my lab work. Now look at this. Results verified by repeat testing. This is interesting. So they tested me a few times, or should I say they tested my blood a few times just to make sure, because my number was 370. Okay, 370. That's high. When we look at the reference range of 3 to 91, it's essentially off the charts. Now, really, one of the biggest differences between what Dr. Rick and I eat on a daily basis is I like to have 1 to 2 medium raw carrots in my salad nightly. So we eat a lot of the same way, but I like carrots. Dr. Rick doesn't have them as often as I do. So it could be that those carrots were making the big difference. Now, here's a picture of the salad that I like to eat. It's big. And it keeps on getting bigger and bigger every year. And here's what it looks like. It's about 10 inches in diameter. So it's a pretty large size salad. Now, 370 milligrams per deciliter, that gets converted into 6.9 micromoles per liter. And we compare that to our groups, I should say. 6.9 is much higher than everybody else. So what I encourage you to do is to do a dietary analysis to see where you are with your beta carotene intake. And if you're really excited, you can get your blood levels of beta carotene tested. Really, the bottom line is that if one is eating a raw food diet focused on whole fruits and vegetables in the 2,000 calorie range per day, generally they're going to be eating way more beta carotene than this study revealed. And their blood beta carotene levels will be much higher than the groups in this study. So in other words, it's good to really understand what research reveals to us so that we don't necessarily take somebody's word for it or listen to videos telling us to do one thing or another based on non-representative information, such as in this case. Really, the bottom line is that cooking is not always necessary to have excellent blood beta carotene levels. It really depends on how much you're eating. So now we're going to shift gears. Dr. Rick is just going to cover a few more things, and then we'll tell you a little bit more about our class. So let me just
give us a moment.
Yep, give the microphone over to Dr. Rick, and we'll get going.
Yeah, no problem.
Here you go.
Guys, I'm so glad to see you all here. If you're learning a lot, type yes in the chat box. I want to know if you guys are learning and digesting and really getting some new perspective here on some ways looking at research. So write yes in the chat box if you're with us and you're learning.
All right, awesome. Well, you probably all noticed that my voice is different, but nevertheless, I'm just going to wave in the bottom of the thing here. And actually, let me keep that there for now. If the picture gets in the way, then I'll move it. So just for fun, I wanted to show that those beta carotene levels Dr. Karen showed when I got 90, that was near the end of 2016. And I got some blood work done at the very end of May this year. and some more in the middle of July. So I just wanted to show very briefly my beta carotene level compared to the reference range in at the end of May of this year, a few months ago, had gotten a little bit lower. And my diet's been pretty consistent over the years, but the main thing I can attribute that to in terms of beta carotene intake is that, I don't know, a year or two ago, I stopped making fruit and green smoothies as frequently, or I really almost stopped completely altogether. And I'm just eating more of the whole fruit, which on the whole, that works better for me. But on the downside, I don't put without the smoothie, I don't put a bunch of greens in there, and greens are full of beta carotene. So I think that brought my beta carotene level down a little, but it's still solid. But then about 6 weeks later, let's see, let me get to the next slide here. And by the way, just for fun, notice my insulin level here to bring things, basically 2.6 to 24.9 is the range. I'm near the low end of the range, which is good. And then 6 weeks later, here we are, July 15th, just a few months ago, my level was up at 102. So I joined Karen, even though I'm just barely there, I've exceeded the reference range for that. And I thought that was cool to see. And the main difference between what I was eating leading up to May 31st versus what I was eating leading up to July 15th was that we had gotten a few cases of cantaloupes. So I was eating more cantaloupes than I normally do. And that was the only major difference in my diet during that time. And it's probably not a coincidence that my beta carotene level went from 66 up to 102. Okay, let's see. During that time, during that 6 weeks, Dr. Karen and I went out once where half of our meal was cooked and it included some steamed vegetables, but that was one part of one meal. And if you add up that you eat typically 20 meals per week, see 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120 meals, half of one meal was cooked. So 1/250th of my diet during those 6 weeks was from things that were cooked. I don't think we can attribute that to my increase in beta carotene. I'm going to suggest it was due to the raw cantaloupes. And then to bring everything full circle, because we started out by talking about insulin sensitivity, let's just take a look here at these July 15th results. First of all, just for fun, my sedimentation rate, that's an indicator of inflammation, was very low. My C-reactive protein, we saw that earlier, was 2.2. My insulin was 4.4, so I'm near the low end of the reference range. And just keep in mind this protein, 0.22. And with insulin being low, and also here I measured my A1C and it was 4.9. That is typical. And when you have low insulin and low A1C and a good fasting glucose level, it's tough to come to any other conclusion other than my cells are sensitive to insulin. And that's really good to see. Now, this low insulin score here means my body doesn't need to make much. And if you're dealing with type 1 diabetes, when you do things that allow your cells to be sensitive to insulin, that means you need to use a lot less insulin and your blood glucose levels are a lot easier to regulate. And that's good to see. And then just for fun, here was, we covered over these other things because we don't want to get too distracted with too much stuff. But here on Dr. Karen's beta carotene result page was her insulin score of 4.7. Now, this was in 2016. We don't measure every single thing on ourselves every single time we get our blood tested. But going to her, the most recent time we checked her A1C, which was, as you can see here, just over 1 year ago, it was 4.8. So again, another example where we see low insulin and low A1C, knowing that that patient's cells are sensitive to insulin. All right. So having said that, we looked at just a little bit, a tidbit of information. that we have available, even though it was a lot. And I know we're running a little over time here. I don't think Dr. Karen and I have ever been accused of not providing enough solid information. We love this stuff. It's what we do. We're really into it. Makes such a difference in our lives. And so let's just talk a little bit about, for those of you who are interested in learning more about whole food plant-based nutrition from a raw fruit and vegetable sort of perspective, or, with raw fruits and vegetables included as a significant part of that diet, we'll tell you a little bit about our curriculum. Now, going back to this idea of transcending what's trending, there's all sorts of stuff coming up all the time. I mean, carbs make you fat and raise your blood sugar always seems to be trending. And whether it's paleo, which is now making way for keto, or Atkins in the past, and there's always different versions of this, and other things come up over time. Beta carotene, getting your protein, choline has come up recently. So there's all these different things out there, and people bounce around like pinballs depending on what's trending at the time. We really want all of you to be very much trend proof, or at least trend resistant. And a solid education allows this to occur. There's so many times I read things that I think to myself, if I didn't know better, this would actually make sense. But because I'm well educated in this area, those things don't throw me off. And I've been able to maintain a consistent level of high health over the years, which I'm really happy about. So we have a curriculum called Mastering Raw Food Nutrition. It's a 12-month online class. It did begin about 6 weeks ago, but it's a 12-month class, and we're actually registering new students through the end of the month. Our students spend typically about 4 hours per week on the class, and there are 2 hours worth of videos each week. And you can see some of the different topics popping up here. So we cover a huge array of topics, and like you saw in this webinar, we go into depth and detail, and we fit things together, and we make sense out of all this stuff. So we have calorie density, overview of nutrition to start, blood sugar regulation. You saw 1 out of 100 slides here, one of my favorite topics, where nutrients come from on a raw vegan diet, such as calcium, B12, vitamin D, essential fats I love, and fat and blood glucose relating together is really fascinating stuff. Just real quickly, acid alkaline balance, cleansing, where do you get your protein, human digestion, enzymes, aging theories. We look at various health statistics. We look at the history of raw living foods and what the different camps agree upon and what they disagree upon. Different approaches to a raw food diet, food combining, weight loss. We've got 2 weeks worth of classic studies in support of plant-based nutrition. We look at the research of doctors McDougall, Castelli, Ornish, Esselstyn, Barnard, Dr. Campbell's China study work, and we lay the foundation that a whole natural plant-based diet is so incredibly powerful and valuable. But then beyond that, we start to expand upon what we saw some of today and look at why we think there are some additional advantages to including more raw foods in your diet. Dr. Karen's section, organic versus non-organic, different plant families to make sense out of why some so-called grains are free of gluten and others have gluten, and those types of things. Again, it's all laying a foundation. Food labels, psychological factors, candida, xenoestrogens and phytoestrogens. Another one of my favorite topics, juice fasting and water fasting. I spent 4 years in practice at a water fasting facility, seeing people recover from diabetes, type 2 that is, and lots of other things. Survey of superfoods. So Dr. Karen has a few sections on this where she looks at the marketing perspective versus the scientific perspective. Sometimes they correspond with each other. Oftentimes they don't. So that helps get rid of some of the exaggerations out there. History of human food choices. Dr. Karen goes into the scientific literature very in depth. Did meat make us have big brains? Was it fruit? Was it starches? She looks at the competing points of view and makes sense out of them. Just basically so many things. If you watch the replay, you can hit pause and take a look at all the topics. We have a whole other page of them. Just a huge array of topics that covers just about everything you've ever wanted to know about plant-based and raw food nutrition. And at the end of the curriculum, we have some educator material built in where, for those of you who are inclined to do so, we actually give you some PowerPoint presentations that you can modify and use to go share and educate other people. And then we cover how to deal with audiences, how to answer all the popular questions, and all those different things. It's extremely thorough. Couple of quotes here. One of our students from last year in her testimonial said, "Hello, Drs. Rick and Karen. I'm so thankful to have been in your class. It has really been a guiding light through the maze of food information," or you could say misinformation there. "Your scientific preciseness in evaluating what is hype from the real truth has been a real help. The detail and depth of the presentations are way beyond what I expected and are a real example of how to evaluate truth from error. Thank you for being so honest and teaching how to be critical thinkers, a skill for all life's endeavors. Thank you for all your conscientious teaching." And Diane from Seattle has actually been on this path longer than us, but we really investigated in this personally as well as professionally. This doctor from Indiana says that it's helped him make sense out of all the different medical research theories out there today. This student said she was already certified in plant-based nutrition, but she needed to know more to help restore her health and to teach others. And she said the course was very useful and we made things easy to understand. And she thought that we were really good teachers. So the way the course is delivered is that there are 2 hours per week of videos similar to the PowerPoint presentations you're looking at now and that you saw on the rest of the presentation. In fact, like I mentioned, we borrowed some of our slides from our curriculum to produce the webinar today. Now, of these 2 hours of educational videos per week, you watch those on your own schedule. So it's not like you have to show up at a particular time, and that's really handy. We have students from all over the world and people with different schedules, so you watch those on your own. And as you've seen here, if anything, we're information dense. We don't drag things out because we have a lot to share. So that makes extremely efficient use of your time. I know sometimes people can spend hours and hours and hours looking up stuff on the internet, trying to figure it out, getting all these different opinions, and sometimes you leave more confused than how you started. Each of our 2 hours, each of our videos just takes so much stuff, sorts through the chaff, gets down to what makes sense, and explains it in a way that allows it to connect. And that is just so valuable in today's world where people are busy. In order to go along with those videos, we send you 4 notebooks. There's over 900 pages worth of notes, and they're in bullet points, and they show the charts and graphs. They're not just a transcript of what we said in paragraph form. So it's easy to follow along with, and our students find that that's so helpful when they have their notebooks open, when they're watching the videos. They can really let the information sink in because they're not trying to write everything down. Once the class is over, the notebooks are lifetime reference material. Now, if you could think of a class, we taught the precursor to this class live for 10 years. And so the videos are like the live presentations that you go to. Again, you watch those on your own schedule. And then typically at the end of a presentation, students ask questions. So in order to accomplish that, we have 6 to 8 conference calls per month. They're on Tuesdays at 2 different times, an earlier time and a later time. And depending on where you are in the world, usually one of those calls works for you. And that's where you can interact with Dr. Karen and I directly to ask questions and to get clear on the information to make sure you're comprehending everything. Just in case you can't make the calls live, we have it set up so you can type in your questions in advance. We record every call and save the calls, so then you can go listen to the call afterwards and hear the answers to your questions as well as to your fellow students. Here's a Another testimonial, it says, after being vegan for 18 years, I was very indecisive about MRFN, stands for Mastering Raw Food Nutrition, about MRFN, especially with the time and the cost involved. I'm so glad that I decided to take the class, and I feel that the education I have gained is well worth the time and money spent. I now have a great understanding of the importance of raw foods and which should be included daily, supplementation and medical test requirements, and foundational and research background. This class really cuts through all the rhetoric, and we love hearing that because that's part of our goal, and we've just had so many students tell us that over the years. She also says, I loved the all-encompassing, non-judgmental, down-to-earth manner you both have. I felt very welcome to participate in the calls. I immensely look forward to the videos and calls each week. Thank you both for this education and experience. So, Kim, you are very welcome. We also have a Facebook group, and the Facebook group is optional, but most of our students join that. And students get to know each other a little bit in there. They share recipes, although we do have some guidelines to make sure everything's congruent with what you learn in the class.
Dr. Rick has frozen for me. Is he frozen for you guys? Let me ask Jose. Let's see here. Okay, so in the chat box, if Dr. Rick is frozen, right? Yes. If Dr. Rick is frozen, right? Yes. Yes, frozen. He's frozen. Okay. Well, man, that light is bright, huh? Jeez. You know, the sun's going down sooner these days. Okay, so, well, in the meantime, I'm going to start answering some questions. But if you want to learn more, the key thing is hit the apply button that is on the lower right part of the screen. And you can then set up an appointment to talk with Rick, Dr. Karen, and you can learn all about this amazing program they have. It's very rigorous. It's beautiful. So I'm going to try and get through so here we go. How can I not have dramatic spikes in blood sugar when eating mostly fruits? So let me try and get these lights working. The answer to that question is very simple. Get my camera going. Okay, all right, there we go. So the key thing is to follow a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet. That is how you prevent spikes. That's number one, okay? Now, it also is going to depend on what type of diabetes you're living with and what you're going to define as a spike. If you're living with type 1 or type 1.5 or insulin-dependent type 2 diabetes, we're just trying to keep you within 70 and 180. That's the consensus time in range, So you eat a meal, you might go up a little bit, but you'll come back down. So that's different. And then when you're living with type 2, the goal is that you just completely get off medications as long as you're producing enough insulin, and you might go up to 140 and you come back down and stay in range most of the day. So a spike would be like to 140. That wouldn't really be a spike, but that would be just a normal elevation. So I hope that answer is helpful. If you want more information on the details of that, you can Google insulin resistance diet, mastering diabetes, and you will find a YouTube video that explains all the details of how to avoid that situation and be able to eat all the fruit you want and have steady blood glucose readings. So that is that. I'm so interested in what you eat, Robbie. Basically, they want to know what I eat, what I don't eat. I love seeing your meals on Instagram, but do you ever crave a hot soup or pizza of any kind? Garlic or bean sprouts? I don't wonder where you get your protein. I wonder how to get enough calories, but also keeping it low fat. Seems so hard. So I personally have chosen to keep my diet very simple. I eat fruits, I eat greens, and I eat non-starchy vegetables like cauliflower and eggplant and carrots, things like that. And I eat them all raw. So if you want to succeed on that type of approach, if that's something you're choosing to do, the key is to learn how to eat calorie-dense fruits. So you got to get your calories from calorie-dense fruits. That's like bananas, that's figs, mangoes. These are foods that are higher in their calorie density. So if you try to get all your calories from things like melons or peaches or berries, it's going to be hard because there's not enough calories per bite, and you have to eat too many total pounds of food in order to be satisfied. So when you eat enough calories, you get enough protein. It's basically as simple as that. There has to be a very, very rare situation where we'd have to tweak somebody's protein intake. In general, eat enough calories, eat enough protein. So let's see what else. Yeah, okay, that should be answered that question. Let's see. Some of these questions I know would be better answered by Dr. Rick and Dr. Karen. I know they were specifically for them. I have a feeling that the fires in their area and the power outage has likely affected them. They told me prior that their cell phones were not working because of this this fire situation. So we'll try to answer the questions that I can. I am new to raw vegan diet and previously diagnosed with prediabetes. How much fat should I consume? Okay, so somebody's asking, they say they basically have prediabetes and they're new to this lifestyle. The guideline that we have for fat is to not consume more than 30 grams of fat per day, or another way to look at it is to have a maximum of 15% of calories coming from fat. And the best way to figure this out is to use nutrition logging software. We prefer to use Chronometer. You can use that. You can use anyone that you like, anyone that you will actually use, and that is going to help you get this information. We're not suggesting that you count calories and spend all your time, being all nitty gritty about what you eat, but it is very helpful to do that for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks to really understand what's going on. Start filling out decision trees. That's a tool we have, and that can really help you understand what's going on with your blood glucose, how to completely reverse prediabetes. That's the goal. Prediabetes can be reversed in 100% of cases. So you get to take charge of your health, and you can do that by following a truly low-fat, plant-based whole food diet. Let's see what other questions I have here. Let's see. Okay, that's pretty much all I'm going to answer for here. Let's see if we can do a couple phone calls. Let me go here. Has anybody put in their phone number? Jose, if anybody's put in their phone number, let me know. I haven't seen any phone numbers. But if you want me to call you and we'll talk, then you can put in your phone number and we'll do it. I see new comments coming in. I go hungry too often when I go low fat. Also have sugary dry skin when I try to eat 10-10. Oh, no worries. You get to try whatever version of low-fat, plant-based, whole food nutrition works for you. That's it. So here we go. Let's do a couple phone calls here. We're gonna call Kelly here. I'm sorry that we lost Dr. Karen and Dr. Rick. It's unfortunate, but we were actually kind of lucky that they were even able to show up, considering the circumstances in their area. But let's get Kelly on the line here. Hi, Kelly. It's Robbie. How you doing?
Can you hear me?
I sure can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Nice to speak
Great
with you.
webinar. Yeah. Hi, Kelly. It's Robbie. How you doing? Good. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Turn the volume down on your computer.
Okay. Yes, I can. Great webinar. Got it down.
Yeah. Turn it to no volume. Okay. Perfect. So, what question do you have?
Well, I think I started following you guys about a year ago. I was pre-diabetic, and it made a huge difference in my life. Although I only weigh about 92 pounds, but my triglycerides went through the roof. And all my lipid panels went through the roof, and I just can't figure out what I'm doing wrong to have my triglycerides. Am I not exercising enough, or what?
And where do you live?
In Texas.
In Texas. Okay. I'm trying to think. Do you have a plant-based doctor?
I have my cardiologist is a vegetarian. Mm-hmm. So he's and he's running all the blood work on me. I go see him about every 6 months.
Yeah.
To try and get my cholesterol and lipids and my cholesterol numbers and everything in line. They just are in the red zone, and I'm trying to figure out why on a plant-based. I do eat a lot of fruits. I struggle with a dinner recipe because I can't figure out how to get enough calories in. It's for dinner, but anyway, I just thought I'd throw it out there in the atmosphere and see if anybody had some ideas on why the triglycerides would be high.
Yeah, well, I mean, there could be several, factors. I mean, we'd have to really dig into a lot of the nuances. But I think, the key thing is I'd love to make sure you got connected with a plant-based doctor. Have you checked out plantbaseddocs.com or I think it's also plant-based?
No, I haven't, but plantbaseddoc.com?
Yeah,
okay.
Plant-based docs and then plant-based doctors. There's 2 websites where you could find a plant-based doctor.
Okay.
And I would work with them and see if they could figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I will do that. But other than that, I just I struggle with what to eat for dinner instead of a bunch of fruit. I find if I eat a lot of fruit at night,
mm-hmm.
It just
it
keeps me up.
Right. Do you like want to follow a raw vegan diet? Is that what you do? Is that important to you?
I pretty much eat raw all day, and then at night it's like tonight I had quinoa, black beans, and avocado.
Yeah.
I'm just like,
mm-hmm.
Well, what do I eat? Sometimes I'll have bananas and romaine, but then I'm up all night urinating. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what you ate for dinner tonight sounds pretty perfect to me. I would just be careful to make sure it's not too much avocado. That's all. It's very,
right.
It's very
that's pretty much the only fat I had all day long.
Mm-hmm. Cool. You're doing great.
Anyway,
as far as the basics of the diet, now we got to figure out the nuances of your cholesterol and triglycerides.
Right. But I loved your program. Found you guys from the medical medium, and having looked back, it's been great. It cured me from my rheumatoid arthritis. I've been 3 years medication free from my RA medication, so it's all good.
That's fantastic.
You guys do a great job.
Congratulations on doing the work. You put in the effort to make it happen, so good for you.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to jump in. Is anybody else called in? Anybody else want to make a call?
No, I think that's all I see here. But I'm glad you called. I'm glad you're doing well, and I hope you find a great doctor to get you on the.
I will.
Yeah.
And I look forward to more webinars.
Cool. All right. Have a good
one.
one.
With you guys, so I'm going to try and get some more in.
Okay. Good. Yes. Absolutely. We'll have more coming up soon.
Thanks much.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, guys. I don't see any more numbers in here, and I really appreciate you guys' interest. We have 158 people still here. That's awesome. You guys are dedicated. You're interested. Oh, look at that. Looks like Dr. Rick and Karen might join us for a second here, so we can wrap it up with them. Oh, you're back. You got to make sure your audio's on. Oh, we can't hear you yet. We can see you, though. We can see you. Okay. Still can't hear you. Somebody asked a good question. Can beta cells rejuvenate through whole food plant-based diet? So that's a good question. We're seeing some small improvements in beta cells. There's some research coming out of PCRM about that and people living with type 2 diabetes. We have not seen that happening for people living with type 1 or type 1.5. So it's hard to determine. It's hard to say that there's like some significant rejuvenation of beta cells. there's been small adjustments. So there's really got to be more research on that. And I hope with, the support of you guys and the work we're all doing together to raise awareness, that we can start getting research dollars funding some of these really important questions, because there is so much money, it's just stupid amounts of money being wasted on silly research. So that's a good question, and I would love to see more people exploring that, and longer term studies of people following a healthy, low fat, plant based whole food diet and seeing what happens for the C peptide. Because at Mastering Diabetes, we're seeing a lot of people who are on the edge. This contingent of type 1.5 who have like a little bit of a compromised C peptide, but not completely like type 1, is really growing. And there are some researchers believe there are more people living with type 1.5 diabetes than type 1. And based on our experience at Mastering Diabetes, I think that might be true. Let's see if we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Sure can.
All right, give me a second. We actually ran over to our neighbors, and they're setting us up to use their Wi-Fi. So Karen's over there. She was expecting me to grab my laptop and run over there and see. But then I got home, just our internet cut off.
That's
and
okay.
We were out. And so, but then I ran home to get my laptop, and now it's on. So I signed on. So let me call her and get her back here.
Okay.
And then we'll jump back in and do the best we can. I'm so sorry, everyone. We figured we were in the clear for electric and power and no fires, but then near the end we got internet cut off.
No problem.
So let me just call her.
Yeah,
and I'll be right.
Go ahead, and then how about we answer one question, Dr. Rick, and then we'll call.
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. Yeah, here I have a good question for you, Dr. Rick, when you're ready. So.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay, so the question that we just had a person call in, and people in the chat box want to know, if somebody is following a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet, let's assume that they're executing it properly, and they are seeing one of two things. Why don't you address each one individually? Let's say they are seeing excessively high triglycerides and or they're seeing excessively high cholesterol. How would you help that person?
I've seen both of those. And for both of those things, 90 to 95% of the time, whole food plant-based diet, I see those numbers being good, appropriately low. I have worked with some people who their triglycerides are high. And there's a lot of information out there that says all carbohydrates raise your triglycerides. And most of the case that isn't true, but there are some people metabolically that seem to favor that occurring. And I've seen that happen occasionally. So what my thing to do, first of all, I'd start with making sure they're not over consuming calories. Because some people metabolically tend to convert excess calories, no matter what the source, into fat, and then that's what raises their triglycerides. So that's the starting point. Getting some exercise is really helpful. And for some of those people, and I've actually had a couple of patients who I've done this with, and this may sound absolutely backwards initially, but because some people preferentially turn carbohydrates into fat, which raises their triglycerides, for some people, I will actually decrease their carbohydrate intake and increase their healthy fat content. And even though that sounds totally backwards, put more fat in your diet to lower your blood fats, that can actually be helpful. Excellent. So, and I've had that happen mostly with people eating more fruit. But those are the good starting points. And the other thing to consider is, even if your triglycerides don't go down to where you'd like them to be, I like to see them in the double digits. Typical reference range says below 150 milligrams per deciliter. If that doesn't work, then you also have to consider, kind of like the theme of this webinar, is that you can't just take one measurement and make an entire conclusion out of that. You have to look at an overall profile. All right. And Dr. Karen, I was about to call you. I came back and we have internet access.
All right. I'll bring this back over.
What if he's struggling with high cholesterol?
Yeah. So for cholesterol, there's familial hypercholesterolemia. Sometimes just genetically, you make more cholesterol, but also then sometimes increasing healthy fat intake and decreasing carbohydrate intake can also help. And I had a patient who we did that with, and it improved her cholesterol profile. Her total cholesterol only went down a little bit, but her HDL went way up and her LDL went down. So she had a better overall profile.
Cool.
And that's just the basics. There can be more going on, but
if people on this webinar or who watch the replay, if they wanted to work with you guys as consultants, I mean, is that an option?
yeah, rawfoodconsulting.com is the website. And it's a simple website. It's not commensurate with our level of professionalism. It's a very basic, kind of underrated website, but it explains the basics of how the service works. And it has a link to schedule an appointment and make your initial payment and cover things that way. But yeah, I order lab work for people and work with them one-on-one through the phone or Skype or video conferences like this. And it's pretty cool.
Okay, well, let's answer a few more questions. Somebody says, is there any difference between regular steaming and using a steaming basket in a pressure cooker?
Okay, we got to get Dr. Karen back here for that. She's the one of the advantages of us working together, and I was just about to get to that slide. Exposure versus cohesion is that we're a good synergistic team, but I don't know everything she knows, and vice versa. So let's see. Just give me a sec here. I think she may have gone back to tell our neighbors that we're not coming back over. So, okay, how about, can we go to another one and we'll come back.
See. There's another one that's about cooking methods, so maybe I'll wait for Karen on that one. Let's see here. What if somebody, again, I think I know what your answer is going to be, but let's answer it anyways. If somebody's trying to do 80-10-10, they're keeping their fat very low, and they're suffering from super dry skin, what are you going to tell them to do?
Increase their fat intake. In my opinion, 10% fat is a bare minimum. I don't necessarily think it's the goal for everybody. Now, having said that, I'm friends and know and worked with people who are long-term 80-10-10ers, and they are thriving. But everybody's a little bit different, and it doesn't always work for everybody. In fact, we have a really a good 80-10-10 friend who a few nights came over with her boyfriend to watch some movies, and we had to vacuum up all the dandruff flakes on the couch after she left. She needs to put a little, and by the way, our diets are about 20% of our calories come from fat. Depends on the day. Sometimes, it's lower, like 14 or 12 or whatever. And you saw our insulin and A1C scores. They're still excellent. And we have low cholesterol, and, all those other things work really well. So, there's a lot to consider with fat. So yeah, I mean, you can get up to 15 to 20%. That should take care of the dry skin and the flaking without getting you into the too high fat category where you're going to run into various issues.
Excellent. Okay. And we have, let's see, another question here. Somebody's like, I'm pre-diabetic. Can I start eating a lot of fruit from the start, or do I need to reduce my fat intake for a while before I do this?
Well, the nice thing, like you mentioned, Robbie, you guys see within a few days of reducing fat, blood sugar levels start to come down. If somebody's, as significant diabetes, their A1Cs are up at 10 or 11 and, that type of thing, you might, we have them focus really on vegetables a lot for a few days. Then they start to introduce fruit as their body is able to accommodate it. With pre-diabetes, yeah, you can start in on the fruit right away because you're just, you only have a little bit of insulin resistance, and that shouldn't be a big deal.
Excellent. Okay, somebody's saying, look, I have the same problem. My cholesterol and triglycerides are high. I'm wondering if I could do, your suggestion of increasing healthy fats, even if they have fatty liver.
Oh boy. So that's a challenging question to answer. I would need to work with them one-on-one. I would need to see their liver enzymes, all that type of thing, and get an overall profile and figure that out. I mean, if they have fatty liver, why? I mean, is there alcohol involved? Have they gone completely overboard on a ketogenic diet, and that's led them to get fatty liver? We'd have to correct the root cause of what caused that in the first place. But the good news is, even if your triglycerides are too high, are higher than ideal, because you're super sensitive to your body converting carbohydrates into fat, that does not cause fatty liver. So if someone's dealing with fatty liver, there's got to be another reason, and we would need to get to the root cause of that, and then change their diet accordingly, moving forward from there.
Absolutely. Okay, should we get Karen on 2 cooking questions and then we'll call it night?
Okay, and let's see, what could I also say? So, okay, and yeah, for those of you that interested in the curriculum, we were just about done with the slide before we got cut off. Ravi, I heard you say, "Oh, I can't hear Dr. Rick," and then the next thing I knew, we were off. But we were just about done, and so some emails are going to go out afterwards for those of you who are interested in finding out more and speaking to us personally. If you think you'd like to join us, so anyway, you haven't lost your opportunity for that. So, Dr. Karen, there's a couple of questions about cooking. Okay. So we'll bring you in for that. All right, perfect. Excellent. Give us a sec.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we have 148 people still with us, guys. We're coming up on the 2-hour mark. This dedication to learning and making healthy lifestyle changes is fantastic. So super glad to have you guys with us. We have Dr. Karen with us now. Okay, the cooking question is there a difference between using a steamer, like a normal steamer, maybe on your stove or something, and also the steaming inside an Instant Pot?
That's a good question. Do you know anything about Instant Pots?
You know what? I should have said it. So I did. When you add pressure, okay, normally with steaming, you can't get above 100 degrees of 100 degrees Celsius, 212 Fahrenheit. But with pressure, you can get hotter temperatures than that. They call it superheated steam. And I think that's why pressure cooking, including the Instant Pot, cooks food faster, because it's actually getting hotter. So that much I can say, but
it would be interesting to see what the temperature is reached inside the Instant Pot. And that would give us an idea as to what nutrients are going to be lost. That would be
so we're not really sure. We need some more data on that one.
Yeah, we need some. We might guess a slight bit more nutrient loss, but there wasn't much with regular steaming. And if that gets people to eat more fruits and vegetables and whole natural plant foods because it's convenient, then we're all for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. If you boil food and consume the cooking water, as in soups and stews, do you get all the nutrients?
You'll get the minerals, but the vitamins are actually broken down through the heating process. So it's good for mineral retention, but not so much for vitamins. Vitamins and phytonutrients will be lost.
Got it. Okay.
In varying amounts. Yeah, good question.
All right. Straightforward. All right. This is a good one. This is a popular topic when it comes to raw food. Can you comment on cooked vegan meals losing their enzymatic property? So would that make raw food a healthier option?
Well, there's actually a few different questions within that question. First of all, can humans even use the enzymes that are found in plant foods for their own digestion? And the answer to that is they can help to some degree, but they're not going to take the place of the enzymes that our body actually makes. And will those plant enzymes degrade with cooking? Yes, they will. In fact, they start to break down anywhere between 104 is what I've been seeing recently. Anywhere between 104 to 121, we start to see enzymatic degradation in plant foods. So that doesn't mean that all of the enzymes are going to be broken down at exactly those temperatures, but that's when we start to see them broken down. The more water-rich a food is, the greater the enzyme loss. The more denser the food is, the less we're going to see in terms of enzyme loss. So it's kind of similar to nutrient loss, or should I say vitamin loss with cooking. The greater the temperature, the longer we cook something, those things are going to determine enzyme loss too.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see here. Can you
hear?
No, I mean, can you comment on the this will be our last question. Can you comment on the macrobiotic diet, which is basically saying that, uncooked veggies are toxic?
Are there any specific, so they're asking the question about uncooked veggies being toxic?
Yeah, apparently that's is espoused by macrobiotic people.
That's really interesting. I actually studied macrobiotics back in the early 90s, and I don't ever remember anybody saying that that raw veggies are toxic. I'm just wondering, is there any particular toxin that they think is present in raw veggies? And is that going to be throughout all of the different veggies? I guess that's really the question.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Well, share your experience.
I could, but I mean, that would take a while to share that.
30-second nutshell. You can do it.
Well, I can tell you what happened with my fatigue after eating a macrobiotic diet for a month after having been a raw foodist for a while. My fatigue just came back full force, honestly. So even if there are some so-called toxins in those veggies, I think that the wonderful experience that I had from eating raw food just kind of offset all of that. I mean, when we talk about toxins in veggies, what are we talking about? Are we talking about oxalates, phytates, those types of things? Because if those are the things we're talking about, then if you want to avoid oxalates, you can go to the lower oxalate vegetables, lower oxalate types of foods. With phytate, you can actually soak and sprout a lot of those out, depending on what they're found in. Like, for example, phytates found in nuts and seeds, oxalates found in leafy greens, and other things too. So there are ways that you can kind of get around those if you're concerned about them.
Perfect. Okay, guys, we're 1 minute away from our 2-hour mark. So we could keep going. We'd be here all night. But guys, if you want to talk to Dr. Rick, Dr. Karen, just click that application link, and you can fill out the application and establish a time to connect and go deep into your personal health that's going on, and you can learn from their course. So click that button and check it out.
Yeah. And if you don't have enough time right now to go ahead and do that, you can always contact us through our website, which is rawfoodeducation.com. There is a Contact Us tab that you can click on to contact us that way if you're interested in our class too. But we encourage you to do exactly what Robbie said here now if you have some time to go and take a look at that form that we have set up for you.
And I think it's pretty short. What it takes, a couple of minutes to fill it out.
It does. It does. Absolutely.
Cool. Excellent. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Karen, Dr. Rick. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And one last thing Dr. Rick would like to say.
Please.
Here you go.
Yeah, just real quick. Guess I'll put these on. All right, can I sit?
Yeah.
All right, so we have a whole bunch of webinars that we've done before this one. And we've got, if you go to rawfoodeducation.com and then you click on the Mastering Raw Food Nutrition tab at the top, you'll see our past 8 or 10 webinars that we've done this summer and over the last few years are there. You'll just see a bunch of videos, and we've done them on a variety of different topics. And for each one of those, it tells our background at the beginning. I share some of mine and some of those also. It talks about the class at the end. And then there's different sample teaching material in the middle. So if you want to keep learning the types of things that we talked about here and some other, scientific stuff that applies to the real world, that's a really good source of educational information there for those of you so inclined.
Awesome. Yes. The content that you guys put out is fantastic. It's evidence-based. It's backed up. It's thorough. So guys, check it out. A lot of really good resources to learn and help you reach your goals. So that's what we're all about here at Mastering Diabetes. Thank you for joining us tonight. And you guys be safe with all the California fires and what's going on out there. I wish you all the best.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya.
Bye-bye.